Welcome back. Now, Trade Union Solidarity says it is ready to take on Dis-Chem regarding what it terms a discriminatory employment policy. This comes after allegations of a letter sent to senior management alerting them about a moratorium on the appointment of whites. For more on this, I am joined by Trade Union Solidarity's spokesperson, Connie Mulder. Connie, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Now, what was Solidarity's immediate reaction to the controversial letter that was sent to senior Dis-Chem management?
I think our immediate reaction, Katlego, was we were taken aback by the explicit racial exclusion that this letter would then include as part of policy from Dis-Chem to somehow meet the employment equity targets. There is good and long legal precedent in South Africa explicitly stating that you cannot create an absolute barrier based on race as part of an employment equity program. And yet here we have Dis-Chem doing exactly that. For no good reason other than they're worried about financial turnover and not at all worried about staff turnover. So from our perspective, we first wanted to confirm if this is true. Obviously, we're not going to. There's a lot of fake news on social media these days. And then we got a legal letter back which stated that, yes, this is the memo is in fact true. They've retracted the memo because it was poorly worded, but the policy, it seems, is still in place. And that leaves us with no option other than going the legal route to ensure that this exclusionary practice is addressed in the courts, and that Dis-Chem will unfortunately learn the lesson that several other companies that have tried to exclude people based on their skin color will learn.
Well, certainly it was poorly worded, and I'll quote a sentence from the letter. It says, so when no black candidate is found and a white is appointed, we need several blacks just to maintain the status quo, never mind moving forward. But Dis-Chem is a JSE-listed company, meaning it is bound by certain rules set out in it achieving a balanced employment equity, as well as rules that enforce certain representation from both the JSE, the FSB, and the Employment Equity Act. Are companies not simply enforcing what is laid before them by regulators?
Well, in Dis-Chem's case here, this is going much farther than what they need to enforce with regulations. And we need to be clear here, there is no noble intent on Dis-Chem's side. This is pure malicious compliance with the fear of a fine for turnover. There's no spirit of the law or nothing regarding that. It's just simply, as that letter states, it's counting heads and then trying to somehow get to a good photo at the end. But the Employment Equity Act stipulates explicitly, and I think there's a massive difference between saying that you've got preferred candidates and you've got an employment equity target that you need to reach, and then creating an absolute quota and enforcing it, placing a moratorium, which basically means you're excluding any white person from any position in Dis-Chem going forward. Section 15.3 and 15.4 of the Employment Equity Act explicitly states that you cannot do this. You cannot create an absolute barrier. This is not part of the law that they need to implement. So Dis-Chem is going much further than the regulations that they need to implement. And we're of the opinion that this is a quota system. There is long legal precedent regarding you cannot do a quota system. There's also an absolute barrier. If you're saying a moratorium on anyone who's white, that means that you're excluding a whole racial group from your company, and this is clearly an absolute barrier regarding Section 15.4 of the Employment Equity Act. And that would mean that they are, in fact, not only treating people immorally, but also illegally in this case, which leaves us with no option but to take legal recourse here and force them back into compliance.
Now, the disparity between racial lines of those in senior and executive positions is still a very wide gap in South Africa. How differently do you as an organization envision the process to roll out in bridging this gap fairly?
Well, I think we're of the opinion there are very good candidates, but we should be focusing, much rather focusing on skills transfer than quotas, making sure that candidates of any color get the necessary skills to be able to not only partake at the level that they should be functioning at, but to successfully and purely on merit get there. And if you look at South Africa's demographics, if we can start facilitating skills transfer properly, there's no way that the demographics will not ultimately reflect the country's demographics. At the moment, we're failing abjectly in proper skills transfer, and that is where the focus should lie. Along with that, I think the time for strictly focusing on racial disadvantage has passed. We need to start focusing on socioeconomic situations so that we make sure that these policies actually implement or uplift people who desperately need it. We do not need to be giving ministers' sons or millionaires' sons advantages because of their skin color, but we do need to be giving poor people a leg up and a hand up where we can. And that's why we're of the opinion, and we've gone international with this, the time is to address this policy at governmental level. Unfortunately, Dis-Chem has chosen to go much further than the government itself has gone with this policy, with explicitly stating we're not going to be employing anyone who's white. Now, that is a very dangerous precedent to set, especially for a JSE-listed company, and it would be a massive outcry if it were any other way. And we need to start asking questions as to why they do this. And what we can see is consumers are asking these questions. On our Facebook page, and our members are extremely angry. And they're busy voting with their wallets and saying, but we're going to move. We're going to use another pharmacy. And for Dis-Chem, it's a ticking time bomb that they're sitting on. And a poorly worded memo with then massive confusion saying they haven't withdrawn it or not is not the way to go about this. This coming week, we're consulting with our legal team, and we will be forcing this issue out into the open to see exactly what that policy entails. And if it's an absolute quota and an absolute barrier based on race, there is no legal grounds for that to exist in South Africa, and we will be addressing it.
But Connie, in saying that in addressing such issues and not addressing it over racial lines, one could counter-argue that there is still a huge amount of institutionalized wealth that was gained by white people through a white government. So we still need these rules in order for us to edge closer towards that line of equality.
I would be very, very hesitant to argue that we need to deprive people of certain basic rights enshrined in the Constitution for some reason in the past. This is a very dangerous road to go down. From our perspective, there is a lot of institutional wealth that has also, if we look at the last 20 years, there's a lot of wealth that has been transferred already. We're of the opinion the people who need who need a hand up in South Africa are your abjectly poor, the people who are really struggling to get jobs. And a policy that addresses people based on socio-economic status would ultimately help the people who actually need help. We've seen too many instances of this explicit policy ultimately benefiting some rich tenderpreneur somewhere who's already a millionaire, and we're making him a billionaire. Whereas we need to get the young and poor unemployed in South Africa, who are overwhelmingly black, into the labor market as quickly as possible. Get them into jobs, get them earning money, and then get them in a position to start a family and to start participating more economically. Now, the current policy does not actually achieve that at any significant level. We can see that BEE has not succeeded in massively uplifting black unemployed people. So we're of the opinion, go to a socio-economic situation. Let's focus on the poverty that we've got in South Africa and the inequality, and let's help the poor and the people who are unemployed at the moment. Policies like this will only serve to entrench people who have already been empowered by the policy at least once. The strict focus on race is something that, in affirmative action terms, flies against international standards as well, which states this should be a temporary measure until we can get back to a situation where people compete. And we're of the opinion we're sort of there. If we can go to socioeconomic circumstances or socioeconomic criteria, we should solve a lot of problems in South Africa, rather than keeping on with a system that ultimately leads to a letter being written by a CEO, being vetted by somebody, which explicitly states words like we've got too many whites, we don't need, for every white point we need more blacks. This level of bean counting is not where we want to be as a country. We would much rather be in a situation where we've got a large middle class and we've got more people in jobs, sending their children to school and ultimately, hopefully, creating a better life for their children.
Right. So lastly, what steps will you as Solidarity be taking going forward?
So we've got a consultation with our legal team. Firstly, we're trying to still confirm with Dis-Chem if this policy is, in fact, a moratorium. We've got very conflicting reports. Is Dis-Chem, in a legal letter to us addressed, said, yes, this was a memo, but it was retracted, implying that the policy was retracted. And then in news reports, we're reading that, no, they're standing by the policy of excluding a whole racial group from their company. From our perspective, we'll then figure out what exactly is going on. And if it is a moratorium and an absolute barrier that prohibits people from partaking in this company or getting any position in this company solely based on race, we will be taking them to court. For our members there who leaked the letter to us under extreme duress, they were told that if they leak this letter, there will be extreme consequences, so it's completely anonymous. On the one side, we're going the legal route. On the other side, what we're seeing is we're seeing consumers really angry from our perspective, saying if you do not want people who look like me working for you, then I'm going to move my business to another company and say I'm going to another pharmacy. I'm extremely angry. So Dis-Chem has an opportunity to come clear here and to just sort of clarify. Thus far, we've only seen muddied waters, but we're hoping that we can get some clarity before we need to go the legal route. Unfortunately, our experience has shown us the only way out of this would be with a court case that enforces the legal requirements of the Employment Equity Act as well as the Constitution.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Connie Mulder there, who is the spokesperson for Solidarity, speaking on how Solidarity will be taking on Dis-Chem. That's certainly a story that we will be keeping our eye on. Now, global